Sorry.
Susan,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you, Linda, Anna, and team for including me in the TAS Collective and inviting me to present today. And to Jenny and Damien, followed your work for many years, and it's an absolute honour for me to be sort of following you and in the same session as you today. So my journey in initial teacher education is in its very early stages. I've just completed my doctoral thesis after having taught geography in schools for close to 20 years and been involved in geography curriculum development. And I've recently been appointed full-time and ongoing as a lecturer in the School of Education at Macquarie University. So today I'm going to be drawing on some findings from my doctoral thesis, which is still out for examination. And I'm going to speak to both questions here from the voice of my participants. And my participants started in my study as pre-service teachers and ended my study as early career. So we get the sort of the full trajectory of their time and experience of out-of-field teaching. But I would like to note that I didn't set out to research the out-of-field teaching phenomenon. My research was focused on transition into the profession and transformation of pedagogical practice, contextualised around geography education, but it emerged along the way that out-of-field teaching became a really significant part of their experience. I would like to acknowledge my PhD supervisors, Associate Professor Michael Kavanagh, Professor Mary Ryan, and Associate Professor Rod Lane, who unfortunately sadly departed during my candidature and went on to amazing career opportunities in New Zealand, but also to my participants, the pseudonyms here, Anna, Emily, Grace, Karen and Matt, who just generously and honestly shared their stories with me the whole way through, and I think their stories will make an important contribution to the field. So just a quick overview so we all know where I'm coming from. My thesis was about transition and transformation. It was the 5 participants, so a small study and qualitative. We used a theory practice reflection sort of focus in 3 phases. So the 3 phases were professional experience and their last year of teaching in an initial teacher education program. Their immediate steps of entry as they identified it into the profession was phase 2. And then last year was the duration of their first year of teaching, of course, compromised and complicated by the arrival of the pandemic. And my study was conceptualised around pedagogy and reflexivity. So the theory practice reflection focused pedagogically on the GEOG standards. So an empirical piece created around about 10 years ago and derived from the practice of experienced geography teachers. So part of what I was wanting to do was to also be able to ascertain whether these standards stood up for a pre-service teacher in early career context. Spoiler alert, they did. Okay, but I also wanted to be able to show pre-service teachers on their journey how they could interpret their context. And we did that through reflexivity theory. So being able to sort of work out what was enabling or constraining them, and then to work out, well, whether it's your personal values and beliefs, whether it's a structural condition that you just need to kind of find a way to work with and work around, or whether it's the culture of people and place that are causing these enablements or constraints to occur. And then of course we get to the process of deciding what you're going to do about it. So you identify or discern what's enabling or constraining you through the emergent properties, you think about what to do, and then you take some action. So we used reflexivity theory to interpret context, and in this instance, it's about out-of-field teaching. Obviously, it came through really strongly as a structural constraint to their practice. And they reflected on the GEOG standards, not only in terms of their geography teaching, but they also started to apply this in terms of how they would manage the out-of-field phenomenon. So they really drew on the structures of evidence as an enablement for them and their personal values and beliefs about what it means to be a teacher, also what it means to be a geography teacher, but in the out-of-field teaching context, their personal values and beliefs about what it means to be a teacher that really enabled and kind of helped them to manage the situation. Also, structurally, it was discovered that the mentoring process that emerged through the doctoral study group, because we met very regularly, often in person when the study first started, and then obviously became an online format, both one-to-one and as a small sort of research group. And in the absence of formal mentoring structures that existed within the school, this doctoral study also kind of took on the role of a mentoring program for the pre-service teachers. So I'm going to be talking about some of their experiences contextualized around out-of-field teaching on their journey into the profession. So what opportunities are there to prepare teachers for the reality of out-of-field teaching? At the moment, from the experience of my participants, I would contend that there might not be that many opportunities, that they're feeling that it's just part of their experience of entering the profession, and that out-of-field teaching is a real thing. And I guess in terms of looking at the opportunities within initial teacher education, there really needs to be some sort of settlement about how we define it. Does it mean the same thing to all of us? Are we using a combination of these well-known sort of areas of identification? Are we defining out of field by a specialisation or stage of schooling, or both? Is it about your self-identification, or is it about sort of the scale within which you are teaching out of field? So for example, with a lot of my participants, they were geography and history trained, or geography and society and culture trained, yet they were teaching commerce and business studies. So that was a sort of a scale issue within the HISI faculty. Anna, as we'll see as we go along, taught all over the place. She taught agriculture, she taught technology, she's teaching languages, you know, that's a beyond scale thing. So I think also within initial teacher education, it would be really helpful, and I know that this is work of the collective, to be able to sort of reach a position about how we are going to define out of field teaching. Within phase one, which was during, prior to and during their professional experience, we did a social lab first before their professional experience, and then during professional experience, I went and observed them teach on a couple of occasions, and then did one-to-one interviews with them after the lesson observations. Anna was the only participant in my group who was not a geography major. But she had geography as a minor. She self-identified as an out-of-field teacher of geography. And at the beginning of the study, she's saying, I feel less trained, I don't have confidence. But as we're going along through the study, she's starting to say, well, I know what it means to think historically. I know what my own subject means to me. Now I do that for geography. And so for her, the geog standards were a very helpful tool for helping her translate, you know, I know this about history. Okay, can I apply certain things within geography? And now I've got an evidence base to sort of guide my practice into where I need to go. So she's thinking about the subject she knows best, and then thinking, what is it that's important about that? And starting to apply those ideas to subjects with which she's less familiar. In terms of the opportunities in ITE to prepare teachers, I think my pre-service teacher group at the time, and some of these points, they were in phase 1 and 2, and in other points of the discussion, they were in phase 3 of the study, so an early career teacher. I think that they would say that their opportunities are limited. They identified out-of-field teaching as a distinct entry point for them into the profession and a constraint. They also identified it as a key feature of their teaching throughout their first year of teaching. They each noted that they did not feel prepared for the out-of-field teaching phenomenon in the initial teacher education program, and they felt that this was also exacerbated by the precarious employment that a lot of them experienced on their sort of finalisation, if you like, of initial teacher education, and then going into kind of casualised work across a number of schools. And even when employed in schools on a more sort of secure basis, they felt that timetabling decisions and faculty organisation still meant they had an out-of-field teaching load, yet they were also helping to mentor and collaborate and guide with teachers in the HISI faculty who were teaching geography, who were themselves out of field. And they did find that a little bit curious, I have to say. The other area where they would say there's limited opportunities for preparation is that they felt that, with the out of field teaching phenomenon, they then noticed an increase in their classroom management problems, and it impacted their time in the classroom because it just added an additional layer of stress and feeling overwhelmed to their work, in phase 2, but also in phase 3 when they were sort of more fully and securely in the profession. So again, continuing the journey and giving some examples, phase 2 profession entry, Matt was teaching commerce, clearly stated, I've never been prepared for it. I feel stressed. I feel an expectation from my students that I need to deliver a good lesson, but I'm kind of struggling with this. I'm not too sure what to do. At the same point in profession entry, Karen was saying, here, look at my multiple subjects. This is what I'm teaching day in, day out at different schools. Sometimes I get a short block at one, but I'm still teaching all over the place. I'm only trained in one of these, which in her instance was geography. I'm learning about new subjects. I'm learning about new schools, new ways of operation. And then, my class is full to bits, and I'm working out how to manage my classroom in addition to how to manage teaching a range of new subjects as well. Overwhelmed and underprepared was the voice of pre-service teachers, I have to say, about out of field teaching. And once they were positioned in schools, Anna's experience was probably more severe than some of the others. She went to a school in rural New South Wales, so she relocated. And she faced many structural constraints along the way, but she really drew on her personal values and beliefs about what it means to be a teacher, and her sort of belief that in terms of accessing quality education, kids in the country, as she called it, country kids have a right to access the same quality of education as kids in the city, and it's my responsibility to do so. She felt very strongly about that. Anna chose to go to the country. She had grown up in rural New South Wales herself, so it was very important to her that she went back to give back to the communities within which she was familiar. In terms of an out of field teaching context, she was in a K-12 school, so she did teach in the primary years, which is out of stage for her. She taught technology, she did teach agriculture, but she found really good links between agriculture and geography, so that kind of started to resolve itself. But then starting to teach languages. And she said, here it is. It's a lot. I've developed anxiety, but I've survived under pressure. So I think if we return to the question about what opportunities are there to prepare, from the voice of a very small group of pre-service teachers in my study, they felt that they were not having the experience that they needed to prepare them adequately for the out of field teaching phenomenon. Basically, my results around transition highlighted that out of field teaching was a key constraint of the transition process into the profession. And when they get to the transformation of practice, out of field teaching again was mentioned by them as a key constraint on the way in which they could develop and transform their practice. However, there's a good story and an enabling story that's behind this as well. So I've got some ideas here from them about how we might be able to manage the interface between schools and universities to help better prepare pre-service teachers for an out-of-field teaching experience. So the possibilities that arose, they all talked about the fact that this sustained emphasis on theory, practice, reflection, so using reflexivity theory to interpret their context, understand what was happening, whether it was sort of structurally imposed upon them and they needed to find a way to work around it, and if so, how were they going to do that? What was going to be either their most enabling or their most constraining factors, and then sort of having an evidence base behind them that came in a variety of forms, but mostly from the JOG standards. We used that in every single interview we did together, and we used it in the 3 social labs that we had. And I know from their comments that I hear from them now, they're still using the process that we set up in the doctoral study group. So they all mentioned that a sustained explicit theory practice, reflection process in a safe space, in a continued and sustained way, gave them a mentoring structure that really helped them to interpret, understand, and take action upon a difficult context, which in this instance was out of field teaching. They all noted that engaging with expert others, and I think this is a theme that came up a lot yesterday, and I believe I've heard it in what we've already discussed this morning. Engaging with expert others, communities of practice, in their instance, it was the professional associations, also the doctoral study group, and Facebook groups that were set up, you know, for commerce and business studies teachers or whatever, that they found ways to engage and be guided by others while they were also busy guiding teachers in their faculty who were teaching out of field. And they also realised that being able to find a way through theory, practice, reflection to really crystallise their own personal values and beliefs about what it means to be a teacher and what it means to be a geography teacher, because that was our original area of focus, really helped them to develop confidence in what they were doing and really helped them to sort of know why the situation was occurring and what they were going to be able to do about it. So in terms of the theory, practice, reflection, one example is Anna says, well, I start my own geography lessons now with what makes this lesson geographical, or if I'm teaching agriculture, what makes this agricultural lesson agricultural, you know, so she's kind of applying some key ideas and now sharing them with her students to be able to help them sort of crystallize ideas about what's important about a subject. In terms of engaging, oh, thank you, Paul. In terms of engaging with professional others, Karen was always of the opinion it's not an individual profession. You know, teaching is with the students and with your colleagues and with networks beyond your immediate school. Personal values and beliefs, Emily. Emily was a career changer, so she drew very heavily on her subject expertise. She made a specific choice only to specialise in geography teaching. And every time I spoke to her, she was, I'm a specialist geography teacher. And she drew on a lot of research that's been shared by this group already in previous years about out of field teaching. And she kind of almost threw that back at her head teacher to refuse an out of field teaching load, because Emily had a prac at one school, the same school where she gained employment in phase 2, and now she's permanent there in phase 3. So at the end of phase 2, she, her head teacher obviously was talking to her about teaching more broadly within the HISI faculty, and Emily said no, and then she threw all the research at him. She used her structural evidence base as an enabler combined with her personal beliefs to be able to say, I'm not doing that, geography is my thing. So what might be some recommendations? Perhaps, and you'll have access to these slides as well, so you can read them through more thoroughly at a later time, but perhaps it might be that accreditation as teachers, as the pre-service teachers move to their graduate status, that perhaps it might be that accreditation becomes conditional upon meeting the professional standards overall from being able to teach fully in field and perhaps sort of master their craft and their content within their own domain. It might also be about the sort of school-university association partnerships where a more formal sort of mentoring structure starts to occur, where we're really harnessing this theory, practice, reflection idea to help students and pre-service teachers interpret their context and work out ways to deal with it. So that's pretty much all I needed and wanted to say today. I've got some ideas about this in terms of timetabling structures when teachers are in school. What can we do with the methodology courses? What's the opportunities for school-university partnerships? But I guess all of that will come out in the breakout rooms and further discussions today. So I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to talk, and I hope that you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.